I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. It's Thursday. That means it's time to get complicated to talk about, just a good conversation with my good friend Gervais, little hot button thing. It's real talk is what it is, Gervais. It's real talk, right, my friend?
Absolutely. Somebody told me, you guys are too tame. I said, no. I said, I said that while the topics may be controversial, Wes and I are perfectly reasonable gentlemen. But yeah, we like to talk about the stuff that nobody else likes to talk about.
We're like 12 deep into a case in the garage.
Basically, right? That's right. Exactly.
It's a public conversation.
That's right. To be gentlemen here.
Yeah, you wouldn't. We act like we would act like at the what is it, Buffalo Wild Wings. People can hear us. Let's not get too animated. But it's a pretty honest conversation today. The idea behind the conversation is: are millennials the worst? A lot of people nowadays have a problem with the millennial generation, also considered the generation of me. Me personally, I was in the military. I even recently retired. I've been retired for a few years now. I certainly had to, in a leadership position, deal with millennials. They are a bit different, Gervais. I think you probably know this. You've got some older children. You might have had to deal with this generation, probably, not only in a leadership role, but, out there kind of dealing with these kind of things. Here's the thing, Gervais. I don't completely blame millennials for the way that they are. If I grew up and I always had a database of all the information and bad takes in the history of the world at my fingertips, I might be like that too.
I'd like to hear a little bit more of the case against millennials, because my thing always with generations is that I can only blame the current generation for so much, because some of this has to lay at the feet of the generation or generations that came before them. My personal worst, if I had to put up a candidate for the worst generation, would be the boom.
Thank you very much. That is my pick for the worst generation. They are the worst.
I think it's like when in some cases you talk about unearned valor. It's like and to me, the millennials in some of their characteristics, you see echoes of that. So you're talking about the children of the greatest generation, and there was, to me, the boomers, they definitely crowded us as Generation X out because there was just so many of them. And it was always this idea from boomers that, do what I tell you to do because I know what's best. And as we watched the results of their so-called philosophies and their policies play out, we were like, no, I don't think you guys really do know what you're talking about, much less what you're doing. So
I consider boomers, generally speaking, to be an entire generation of narcissistic assholes. That put us in a very bad spot. They introduced the idea that everyone should be under mountain loads of debt. That's because of boomers. They also ruined the institution of marriage. It's because they were so entitled because of the greatest generation and then the silent generation after them, who had worked so hard to get out of the Depression and World War II, World War I, and all these things. They had to go through such hardships that they sit there and they saved and they built all these things up. And then when it was time to give them over to the next generation, the boomers, they thought, well, you just get things for free. You never have to work for anything. So they never appreciated anything.
Yeah, and never had a real sense of passing it on or pass it on. There's always this attitude of like closing the door behind them or pulling the ladder up once they got theirs. And, and all of it was hidden behind this thing of like, kind of like maybe more of a 50 like dad or mom knows best. And it's like, no, not really. And I think that's where the very skeptical ethos from Generation X comes from, because like you just realize a lot of them have feet of clay. So, and you don't damn the whole generation. It's not everybody in the generation, but by and large, that was a characteristic of the boomers. So with the millennials, it seems like if I had to, just me personally comment on them, it's almost like the skepticism of Generation X to like the nth degree, but with very little context. and that's my problem.
Their entire lives, like the world is ending, and only you can save it. So you have an entire generation of people who feel almost worthless if they aren't saving the planet or saving something. Whereas, the prior generations, it was more like self-reliance. You got to take care of your family. You got to go out there. You got to get a job. You got to establish yourself so you can get a house, get a car, get married, and all these things. And in this generation of millennials, through no fault of their own for the most part, because of all the misinformation and the people that they've looked up to, they've never felt like they needed to do that. They feel like damn, establishing myself, damn, going out there and getting a really good job. And that's obviously not everybody, but I could need to do something real with my life, which means sitting in the basement and fixing the planet.
So I think, like, to me, what seems the one of the lightning rods scene, and maybe you can help me out with this. One of the lightning rods for this kind of millennial hate seems to be Greta Thunberg, the activist, the young activist. Yes. It's just a lot of, I would have to say, boomers and a lot of guys of my Generation X can't stand this young lady. And I'm just kind of like, on one hand, I kind of get it because, it's the fact that her being a child and, like, okay, you can say he hasn't really lived a life yet, what maturity and wisdom can really achieve. But at the same time, I'm like, well, guys, she is just kind of trying to save the planet that apparently on some level is in some danger.
Also,
for her generation and generations after that. But she seems to really rub people the way that Barney used to rub, like I think it was Generation X's back in the day.
It's because she's been told by these big magazines and publications and these big entities that that's what she's going to do. Like, you are the face of this, that you're going to change the world. And she believes it because she hasn't been out in the world and seen how it really works. Yes, you can be part of the change, but it's almost impossible to change the entire world for good by yourself. Like, you have to have people like along with you, but I don't want to be talked down to by an autistic 17-year-old from Europe about anything. You know what I'm saying?
It's like, I kind of know what you're saying. Okay, but my thing was the young lady saying anything that wasn't true? I guess that, to me, I had to
tons of stuff that is absolutely infinitely debatable. The idea of climate change. Okay, climate change is real. We had an ice age once. How did man cause that? All of the ideas of man-made climate change, which I agree with. Hey, we've had holes in the ozone layer. We've certainly affected our environment. But to the degree that we've affected our environment, to the degree we can improve it, and to the degree that we can actually predict any of these things is absolutely absurd. Go back and watch, what is it, An Unfortunate Truth or whatever that scam that Al Gore did not that long ago that was predicting all the things that were going to have happen by now. None of them have happened. In fact, a lot of the opposite things have happened.
Yeah, but Exxon got it right, though. Exxon was like, oh, we knew. We just didn't tell the rest of y'all. But Exxon got it right.
Hey, of course, big corporations are like that, and you can blame your politicians who are taking their nice lobby money to stifle these types of investigations or scientific inquiries into the effects of smoking or the effects of fossil fuel emissions on the environment, all these things. And now we're supposed to just trust our government and our representatives who have been continuously screwing us over for decades upon decades. And I think that's definitely one of the big disconnects between millennials and Gen Xers is like, why do you believe in these people? There's nothing to believe in. If you're not lining their pockets, you're not useful to them.
Well, I got to give you that. That was a little bit of the millennial in me that got killed with this last couple of it over the last 4 years between Bernie Sanders and these so-called Justice Democrats. I was like, if you guys will never get this much time, money, and more support from me ever again. It's like you can't stand up for nothing. But let me ask you this: is this same hate for millennials also aimed at the Parkland survivors when they had a little thing going? I think a couple of years ago. What was the
I don't blame the Parkland survivors. I blame the adults that decided to use the survivors essentially as a soundboard for all the things that they think need change. Is Parkland
so
awful?
We actually blame? No, go ahead.
Is what happened in Parkland absolutely awful? It's deplorable. It disgusts me that it even happened. But we know that there was a breakdown as far as the security there. I'm not in favor of changing the Constitution itself over an event. Now, there have been more than one. I'll agree with that. But those students were used, and some of them, obviously have taken advantage of that and, gotten into some pretty prestigious universities after that, even though it sounds like they weren't even qualified to get there. And good on them, I guess, for taking advantage of a situation.
That's
but,
right.
I'm not going to blame the survivors.
Mm-hmm. So now are the parents of the parents of the millennials basically us, our group, our generation, Generation X?
Not me, because I was born at the very end of the millennials. I'm more of those going to be a parent of a Zoomer. Actually, I guess my kid's generation will be the one under it because I waited till I was a bit older. But it's the early Gen Xers and the late, what I call the worst generation, the Boomers, or the parents of millennials.
So late Bloomers, the early generation. I mean, I can see how a lot of what comes to millennials is basically the pent up cries of early Gen Xers, because really, so for me, I was born in '73, so I would consider myself an early Gen Xer, and I think a lot of it was that you were just drowned out by the just the huge mass of boomers who was just running everything and giving opinions on stuff, and you're just looking at them like, dude, that ain't right. And so now that we've had kids, and now we can use these kids because they're so lovable and cuddly, and people go, oh, and they'll almost listen to anything they say. I can see that dynamic of the kids being almost in a sense, much like what's the name? Kris Jenner used Kim Kardashian.
Well,
becoming a vicarious tool for all your ambitions and dreams and the things you want to accomplish in the world. I mean,
I saw a YouTuber. She was making her 8-year-old cry because they took their dog to the vet, and she was doing takes. She's like, "No, you need to cry more, and your hand needs to be here," because I think everybody feels like they're a star because of reality television, YouTube, stuff like that. I mean, there are more children in that generation that strive to be YouTubers than police officers or a lawyer or a doctor. I don't think it's a bad instinct. I don't think it's a bad instinct to want to change and impact the environment around you. And don't get me wrong. And the thing is, and to do it in a way where you but I think that you have to be able to do it in a way where you're conscious of, basically history and really actually knowing what your motives are, knowing what unintended consequences mean, and just knowing the history of something. I mean, my whole problem with the whole, pretty much the whole woke thing is not so much that, okay, look, you don't want to live in a world where people are being oppressed or marginalized for one reason or another. But it's like you still kind of have to have an idea of what it is you're trying to accomplish as a goal. So is the goal to actually create the kind of world where basically, and as much as I hate using this part of the Martin Luther King speech because it's so overused, where people are being judged by their merits, or is it score settling? Because a lot of what it seems to go on in woke stuff is, it seems to be more like settling scores as opposed to bringing true balance to a system or to a culture or to society. That's just what social credit, and that kind of goes into it. You mentioned, knowing history. Remember what happened with the Parkland survivors? The guy that went to Harvard. He wanted to do an armband, and he put it out on social media, and all the people that agree with him were going to wear these armbands, so they could let everyone know that they're in it together. He's like, you do realize have you heard of the Hitler Youth? Do you know what this picture looks like? It's because you're not aware of what it is that you're projecting. And a lot of the things that we're seeing nowadays is it's all for the greater good. It's but we've seen these things done in service of the greater good, and it never ends up serving the greater good. You have to understand.
Well, yeah.
And I might be too cynical, but at the heart of every person is somebody that's ready to be corrupted.
Yeah,
money and power to do those things.
Yeah, that much is true, because it's like I was watching there's a podcast I like to watch called Bad Faith, where the host is Brianna Joy Gray, and she had a recent interview on with the woman by the name of Talia Levin, I believe her name was. Up until this podcast, I'd never heard of her, but apparently she was someone who had written this book, which was based on her going undercover and debasing into the world of, I guess, white supremacy or whatever it was. She to the point where she basically pretended to be a female white supremacist on a dating site for 18 months. And so some of the takes that she comes away with this is basically she's just people should be punching Nazis in the face, they don't spend time trying to de-radicalize them. What you should spend time doing is just passing sweeping policies that basically take ostracism to the nth degree. It's don't even try to convert. That's too much time. That's too much energy. You're asking too much of people to do that. If people want to be a Daryl Davis, for those of you who are familiar with Daryl Davis, go ahead and knock yourselves out. But by and large, what Daryl Davis does is not scalable. So what actually should happen is anytime you see a white supremacist, in this particular case a Nazi, you should be stomped out. And apparently, the way this interview went post-interview, the Talia Levin, she got to the point because Brianna Joy Gray, I guess, was trying to have a debate and discussion about the efficacy of basically just punching Nazis in the faces, as you identify them, that it might not be that efficacious. She got to the point post-interview of accusing Brianna Joy Gray, who was a black woman, of being a Nazi sympathizer. So it's that's kind of my point, is that it's do you know what it is that you're trying to accomplish? I realize you got the tools now. Social media is a very powerful tool in terms of bringing people on board, communicating your message. You can take pages from the Saul Alinsky playbook to get a lot of things done. But if you're not sure, if you don't understand what it is that you're trying to do, and what can be some of the unintended consequences of what you can do, you end up becoming the very thing that you claim you're against.
We got Larry Elder with the California recall. Recently, he's walking, and because he's the new face of white supremacy in California, even though he's a black man, because he's a conservative, a white woman decided she was going to put a gorilla mask on and egg him because he's a white supremacist. Who's the bad guy here?
I'll put it this way. So I'm not defending Larry Elder under.
I know you don't like Larry Elder. You're not a fan of conservative black politicians.
No, it's not that I'm not a fan of conservative black people. So let's not go there, because I like Sonny Johnson. I like Thomas Sowell. So that's not what it is.
Everyone
I'm not
likes
a fan
Thomas
of ridiculous. That's
He's
right. Because he's smart. Exactly. I'm not a fan of ridiculous black conservatives. So let's make that distinction. And Larry Elder is a ridiculous black conservative, because his response to what happened with Philando Castile was just that. It was ridiculous. So, but now, do we go to the point of somebody putting the gorilla mask on and egging them? I think you're missing the point. That's all. But yeah, like I said, I'm not going to defend Larry Elder. I got no
can't
problem with
claim
black
that you're the
conservatives
good
who make
guy in
sense.
that situation.
Oh, I agree. And that's what my point is that what is it that you're trying to accomplish? If you're just trying to accomplish score settling, the simple fact of the matter is that old saying, the problem with an eye for an eye is everybody ends up blind.
And that's the thing that we're seeing nowadays is a lot of times it's easier to go out there and silence people you don't agree with. It's easier to go out there and call a black person a Nazi or a white supremacist to get their opinion marginalized and removed from the public discourse than it is actually to go out there and debate them on the terms of what they actually believe. It's easier to put words in people's mouths, and the millennials have absolutely adopted that as a method of attacking your opponents on both sides.
Oh, yeah.
More on the left, in my opinion, but it's certainly happening on the right as well.
Well, what's happening on the right? Look, at a certain point, I'm not as well versed as those on the left in terms of political operatives who have contributed to this thing, but I definitely know the ones on the guys on the right. That's Lee Atwater, David Brock, who now is on the left, at least what he calls the left, and Frank Luntz. It's look, guys, don't get mad because the millennials, especially the left millennials, the far left millennials, have mastered what you guys have taught them. It's like those guys were those
so
guys were masters.
You're blaming the conservatives for what's happened with the liberal millennials?
No. See, no. Listen to what I say. Don't put words in my mouth. I said I don't know the guys on the left as well. I'm not as well versed. I'm sure that they're out there and that they've been active. What I'm saying is Lee Atwater, who was back in my day when I was growing up, because I could never figure out who the mastermind was responsible for that lovely racist rhetoric and message that came out of the Republican Party, and for the most of the conservative side. Then I discovered Lee Atwater. Then there was David Brock, who was more like the maybe late 80s, 90s version of it, until he jumped ship and basically became Clinton, because he's definitely mastered and continued his craft when it came to coming after progressives on the behalf of basically whatever you want to call them, neoliberals on the left side. And then Frank Luntz has been notorious for it. He only jumped ship once, pretty much around the time Trump started getting elected. He had no problem with coming up stuff like, well, let's not call it the estate tax, let's call it the death tax. So as these guys playing around with words and playing around with concepts and weaponize these things, that has been their stock and trade has been celebrated. And now all that's happened is you have now this contingent on the left who is doing the exact same thing. I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying do the exact same thing. They just gotten really damn good at it.
I love how you're
to the point, but it's point with some of you guys on the conservative. But some of you guys on the conservative side say you actually are afraid to say certain things. And I was like, well, that's the whole point. And it's like the whole point is to use words, concepts, and phrases. And
Saul Alinsky's book has been out for decades.
Oh, I know.
These aren't new ideas, and he's certainly not conservative. He wrote the playbook of what we're seeing today. And I would say just because of conservatives took some of the elements of the Saul Alinsky playbook and utilized them, doesn't make you right either.
No, that's my point. My point is nobody's hands are clean in this. But this is in other words, we always talk about slippery slopes. So this is the thing now, even when they talk about with free speech and the way that the left is going after is talking about issues of free speech or censorship. It's like, look, guys, if you do this, there's no reason for anybody to now say, oh, because of ethics and morals, let's pull back now. No one is going to unilaterally disarm at a certain point. For you to unilaterally disarm means that you are putting yourselves at the complete and total mercy of the other side. And the simple fact of the matter is we have gotten to the point where there is no mercy, no compassion, let's think about the higher principle idea here on either side. So welcome to it. So all I'm saying is I don't remember the conservatives stopping it, and the liberals, if you will, the left, they sure ain't stopping it. These guys are up in the ante to the point where they end up slitting their own throats. These people will go after someone, and then 3 weeks later, the same tactic is used on them. It's almost like instantaneous. It's almost instantaneous. But what I'm saying is, that's what I said. I didn't say that there weren't lefties like Saul Alinsky who weren't engaging in the same tactics and principles. I'm just saying I'm not well versed in them. So for those in the comment section who would have pointed out the many ones, I looked them up too. All I'm saying is this is where it goes. So with a lot of my conservative friends who I talk to, they're like, oh, this and all that. I'm like, dude, they just learned how to do what your side was doing so well for so long. And part of that was enabled by the fact that we had a bunch of Democrats who were going along with it. They just sat there and played dead and act like stupid. The dumbest thing I ever heard, the dumbest thing I keep hearing people say is how Democrats are incompetent. They're not incompetent. They're in on it because they get their money from the same guys that the guys in the conservative get. So this is one big game that's been played by the establishment. And now, as we've been saying, they have taught these lessons to some of their children, and their children have become experts at this. I mean, they have become gosh darn experts at it. It's like you guys had to come up with the term cancel culture to identify a tactic that basically has been used against other people of all different political
absolutely colors. I'm not going to hide behind that.
All different classes.
The first time I went to a youth meeting at my church, I brought a friend from school. He was interested in potentially learning a little bit about the Christian faith. I brought him in. It's like, why don't you come in? Wednesday's youth night. He comes with me. Next thing I know, we're outside and we're having a bonfire, burning CDs. I was like, I'm so sorry about this. This is the first time they've ever actually done this.
No, it's like you know my go-to favorite, which is the Dixie Chicks. I'm like, if you guys didn't think that was cancel culture back then, it's like, come on, you just didn't have a name for it yet. It's like, and you think that wasn't some Hitler-like behavior going on. Are you serious? You ever heard of book burning? It's like people burning CDs, and then it's like cancel them off the radio stations. I'm like, we didn't have a name for it back then, but we have a name for it now. And so it's like people have lost sight of what is it that you're trying to do. And it's always some element of a group of people being manipulated by some other group of people. So I've got no problem with that. So that's why I can't say millennials are the worst, but I will say they're damn effective at this thing. They are really effective.
I don't think they're the worst. I think boomers are the worst. Yeah. Easily.
No. I think boomers are, it's
like the original sin.
Go ahead.
In American culture. It's where it all started. And you're right. You cannot point out how someone's being hypocritical, how they're being unprincipled based on their own words anymore, because they don't care.
No,
that's not care. The point. I'm still going to say what I say. I'm still going to try it. You cannot battle them, in the battlefield of morals or principles. Those things have passed these advocates or these activists so far. They're so far past it. It doesn't even affect them. You can sit there and point out line by line how they're a complete hypocrite, and everything they said 2 weeks ago, they've gone completely against. Unfazed. They won't even answer the question. They'll just laugh at you and say, that's not what we're talking about today. What did Biden say? Obviously, he said, wasn't that 4 days ago? Like, what?
Biden. I stopped listening to Biden after he tried to tell me that if I didn't vote for him, I wasn't black. But anyway, go ahead.
You know what I'm saying? That's the point. It's like lick your ice cream and say, that was 5 days ago. What are you talking about? The world's changed. It's gotten to, and this is the thing. That's what I say, people don't realize what they're doing. So, it's like when the whole presidential campaign with Biden's running for, and I'm talking about people who consider themselves liberal, people who consider themselves left. It's like the way they were caping for guys like Bloomberg and for like Joe Biden. I'm just like, do you guys even realize why you're doing what you're doing anymore? And so, of course, all this is because Trump was so terrible. Trump was so horrible. It was like, if we do this, we lose the Supreme Court, now Roe versus Wade and blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever. It's like, in the grand scheme of things, the simple fact of the matter is none of them, as you were saying before, no politician is actually out looking out for your best interests, much less the best interests of our country, of anyone else. At the very least, they're looking out for their own self-interest in terms of climbing the ladder and whatever their career is, and definitely interest of whomever's supposed to be a donors. And apparently this thing is so pernicious. It is so pernicious that as someone who was an early supporter of a little project called the Justice Democrats, where the whole point was supposed to be, if I give you money and allow you to be sustaining in a way that you don't have to go to a corporate donor, when the time comes, you get in there, you will vociferously and everything short of violently fight for my position. And all them suckers got in there. They all got turned. Every last one of them. Every last one of them got turned. And it's like, and money ain't the question. Moral support ain't the question. Time and energy ain't the question. And it's just, it is what it is. And the thing is, it's because nobody actually understands what it is that they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish. And it's a sad state of affairs. But I don't see, at this point, the brakes aren't going to get pumped anytime soon, because it's kind of like there's a guy by the name of Charles Stanley who's a pastor, and I follow him a lot. And when he was talking about Christianity, just talking about Christians now, he's talking about the rest of y'all, talking about Christians. He says, if you don't acknowledge Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, anything goes. And that's where we find ourselves secularly now, is that when you don't have a sense of, what are the things that bind us together? What are the things that are common to us? What are the things that we all accept as should be some sort of governance in our society and our dealings with each other? Anything goes. So now we're to the point now, like you said, you have discussions with people, merit and facts are out the window. You can't have an argument based on the merit of someone's argument, because at the end of the day, what they just say, well, I just don't believe that, or I don't care, or my feelings are more important than your facts. A certain person introduced the phrase alternative facts into the conversation. And that's what we're really done. I'm sorry. It's like, so now we all have an idea of what, it's like my idea of what this word should mean is just as valid as your idea of the word, and yours is just as valid as mine. But Merriam-Webster have been cut out the whole conversation at this point. I think it's interesting. You brought up the Trump election earlier. At that time, I was still in the military. I was getting ready to retire, and I had a younger sergeant talking to me. And they're like, "Oh, can you believe what's going to happen? If Trump actually wins?" And at that point, it looked like there's no way he could win. What do you think would happen? I was like, first of all, he's not going to win. We see all the numbers. It doesn't look like it. Obviously, that part was wrong. I said, what do you mean? What is going to happen? Like, do you think this and this and this? I said, well, I think Trump winning would be one of the more interesting things I've ever seen in my life. They're like, well, why do you say that? I was like, well, because he's not a politician. He's coming from a different sector of life. He's coming from private business. And in private business, you have to be successful to continue. I was like, and if you look at the government and the way that the government's run, you don't have to be successful at anything for whatever it is that your project to continue on. I said it would be really interesting to have a president coming from private business without any political connections to get in there. I was like, because it would be a shock to the system. And also, I think we will learn the true colors of a lot of people in politics and everything. And it turned out it ended up being far more true than I ever could have imagined. Just the shock to the system of bringing someone outside of politics. And you really found out just how dirty and disgusting and how, as you said, they are all in on it. Absolutely.
They're all in on it. Yeah,
they could not handle an outside entity coming in with any type of authority.
No, it's like even now when you talk about the whole hesitancy about taking a certain medication to try to deal with the aspects of the great disaster. And the simple fact of the matter is, it's like, again, nobody's hands are clean. It's like, people are like, oh, the uns and what they're doing and this and that. And how
it's just another opportunity to separate everybody, get them yelling at each other and ignore all the bullshit that's happening behind the curtain.
Yeah, because it's like, as people are rightfully pointing out, because it's history, it's video, it's recorded on video, a certain person who's second in command in the country, who's the vice president, said she wouldn't take it when a certain person was president at the time. If the medication
and a certain president 3 weeks ago, I think it was 3 weeks ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, said he would never ask him for a mandate for that medication.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I know, but he was lying to everybody then. Just like all those was like, oh, they gonna mandate that joint. I said, y'all can fool yourselves if you want to. They mandate that. Too much money being lost. Have to mandate that. Can't be running the country in a world like this. Come on, man. No, and that's the thing. It's like you almost can't go back if you can't go back in history. And it's like if history doesn't exactly repeat, it always rhymes. And the thing is that we just, none of us really try to have a sense of like, this is all has happened before. So it's not just the fact that these circumstances have presented themselves before, but there's also solutions to them. But now we've gotten to a point where I think there's such an information deficit, and I think there's such a deficit in terms of the desire to kind of know certain kind of information, that now people are just being manipulated left and right. And people, and it's a lot of lack of wisdom in the ways that people go about doing this, because there's real simple sayings that address a lot of stuff. What goes around comes around. I mean, it's literally, you have these people, they come on and they make some accusation towards somebody for being racist when it's something that's not necessarily racist to the point where, you got to get somebody fired. And it's like literally a month later, that same person will get accused of the same thing and lose their job. It's like, this is how crazy this joint has got. It's like there's no standards. There's no understand. It's just, for the millennials out there who are kind of like looking at this and going, yeah, this doesn't look right. All I can say is, look, guys, what you're going to understand for the most part is that policies, especially policies that are overarching and dealing with larger groups of people, are only going to take you so far in terms of managing their affairs of life. At a certain point, everything has to get down to a case-by-case basis. You have to almost deal with people the way that they deal with you. You got to kind of get your facts first. Like, people get on me, it's like, you're a hypocrite because, you say you believe in cancel culture. There's only two reasons I believe in cancel culture. I said, first of all, before it became what it is now, it used to be called boycott. And the second, and my other problem with it is that you have no due diligence when you do it. The difference between boycotting and cancel culture is that cancel culture, you can just whisper an accusation and take somebody down based on that accusation. When they boycotted back in Montgomery, Alabama, the bus system, there was a clear system in place that made you sit in the back of the bus. It wasn't a question of what was going on. That's what they were protesting. But how did they protest? They stopped riding the buses, deprived people of money, which in turn deprived them of their livelihood. Does that sound familiar yet? And to get them to capitulate to their will, which is I get to ride on the bus wherever I want to ride on it. So cancel culture isn't new. It's just this particular variation of it is so lacking of due diligence.
But that was in direct response to people being treated like second-class citizens inhumanely, and that was wrong. What's happening today is people want to make a statement like that, Gervais, but there aren't as many things like that in the United States, so they have to look for these things and declare that this is equivalent to that. It's absolutely insane. And the millennials and the boomers have completely bought into this idea, hook, line, and sinker, and Gen Xers are sitting right in the middle going, well, they both outnumber us. My goodness, what is going to happen? Fortunately, it seems like the Zoomers, the Gen Z, after the millennials, seem to be a little bit more of the mindset of maybe instead of just reading the Wikipedia article on it and getting the answer, maybe I'll go look at the references, go look where they got the information and come up with my own information.
Well, we'll see. We'll see that. We'll see. I mean, yeah, I do think that the Zoomers are getting a nice view of what insanity looks like. What self-righteousness at its nth degree looks like. And not only just self-righteousness, but self-righteousness untethered from any kind of a responsibility or even reality. A desire to be responsible. Reality, but a desire to be responsible for what it is that you're inflicting upon someone. Because the simple fact of the matter is, there used to be, once upon a time, these very simple phrases and sayings, and not written down in the book any place, they're generally derived, but it's like, you have to be careful about how you handle people because, that could happen to you. So there used to be a saying, be careful how you treat people on the way up on the ladder, because when you come falling back down, those are the same people you're going to meet along the way. And I think what's happened is, go ahead. Yep.
When I was a kid, it's called the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You can go to any other religion, they all have the same rule. Any other belief system or some type of ethos, you will find that. Treat others the way you want to be treated. And everybody thinks, well, I'm anonymous now. I don't have to treat anyone with kindness.
Yeah, there's no accountability. We're not answerable to one another. So that's why my favorite version of that is I believe it's from the Torah, where the version of it was, do not do unto others that which is hateful to yourself. Yes. And because what it does in a real more sense, it brings it back onto you. You have to think about the things that you would hate for somebody to do to you before you inflict that upon someone else. But what we have is that I think we have more this Nixonian approach to it, which is that you just don't think it's going to happen. You just don't think you're going to get caught. You just think that you can do this to people, and there's going to be no level of accountability. So when the accountability comes, they're actually generally shocked and surprised, and that's when they start putting up posts imploring people to not do what they did. But it was like, dude, it wasn't any more true now that you found it out on the other side of it than it was when people were warning you not to do it to begin with. Because there's plenty of people warning, you don't want to do this. Like, a lot of times my good friends on the left are saying, you don't want to do these things because they'll get weaponized against you. And I'm sorry, one refrain to that is, it's already been weaponized against us. Now, all you're saying is just get weaponized more. So really what people are calling for is for somebody to either unilaterally disarm or we all disarm together. But at this point, everyone's got to pretty much decide, let's stop this, because you're almost a fool to unilaterally disarm, because there's been too many examples over the last 10 to 20 years where somebody backs off to do something and the other person just comes ramming on it and just beating them over the head with it. So nobody's going to back down at this point. It almost doesn't make sense to back down at this point. It's like,
there's no benefit, right?
There's no benefit to it. There's no benefit to take it out, to take it the higher ground of the.
You don't get likes and retweets for being a good person.
No, sir. Negativity rules the day.
It's crazy.
It's the tribal age.
When we look at our justice system, right, which I think we have a pretty, as far as justice systems go, it's pretty good. There's certain things that could be better, but there are statutes of limitations on certain crimes for a reason. But there are no statute of limitations on your words. Like, hey, if you go back to when I was like 13 years old, I tight rolled my jeans. As far as I'm concerned, that's a crime against humanity. And it should be offensive to people. But I don't think that my life should be ruined because there's a picture out there of me at 13 years old with tight rolled jeans. Look at the context. There were music videos at the time. That was pretty much the accepted fashion of the day, even though I know, looking back, I look ridiculous and likely sounded ridiculous with whatever vernacular I was using at the time. People are going back in time. Everything we do now is archived. Like, oh, let's look for a violation. If you go back in time and look at people's history and everything, you're going to be able to find something that's offensive or bad, especially when you remove the context and they're weaponizing that and people just go along with it. They never even ask, why did he even say that? How did this come up?
Yeah. Well, and that's because in a lot of real ways, there's I'll leave that to each person how they feel about it. But I think there is a general feeling is that that's not my job to sit there and basically shepherd somebody or understand why they did something. The whole thing is just to punish their offense. And I think that's why I know it for me as a Christian, the thing that I found missing from a lot of Christian conversation is this idea of repentance. It's like this thing of is that when someone actually sees what they've done that is wrong and they turn away from that thing from that point. And then when someone practices repentance, there is supposed to be this thing of we call forgiveness, where when you realize somebody acknowledges that he's done wrong, you're basically welcome them back into the community, out of the community they were in, or as a new person, as someone new entering the community. And the thing is that a lot of what's going on right now, we just have to be perfectly honest about this. It's not necessarily being driven by a sense of justice. I think there's some people who it is driven by a sense of justice, however overwrought it may be. No, that's what I'm saying. No, I'm gonna get there. Is that some of it is justice, but it's like it's not a justice that's tempered by wisdom, and I think there's that part. So in other words, if you have people who are pursuing things that are just, but they're not thinking about unintended consequences. They're not thinking about once you win the war, how do you keep the peace? And the way that you win the war is going to determine your ability to keep the peace. And then for everybody else, it's straight opportunity. They're a bunch of opportunists. There's no question they're a bunch of opportunists. That's the difference, and I'm sorry, between Thomas Sowells and the Sonny Johnsons of the world and the Larry Elders and the Candace Owens of the world. One group is a bunch of opportunists. The other ones are actually trying to address and seriously address the issues of the day. That's all, and now we will have to be wise enough to know the difference between the two. And the way that you know the difference between the two is only going to be two ways. It's basically the actual merits of their argument and the way they conduct themselves, publicly for the most part, sometimes private. And I think some private conduct should never be used to judge what somebody's public, what they're arguing in terms of the merits of their public arguments. I don't care that somebody is sleeping around with 15 women. That factor doesn't, for me, detract from the merits of their public arguments.
What if they sell themselves as a family person that puts their family first?
That's fine, but if you do that, then you're a hypocrite. So you disqualified yourself. Well, that's what I'm saying is but you can talk about family coming first, and if you don't live that, then you've disqualified yourself to that extent. So that's what I'm saying. Again, I say it's a case by case basis. You're never going to come up with this like template, this boilerplate, where you're going to be able to solve every issue of the day or adjudicate every issue of the day based on that template. That has to be a starting point. Principles have to be a starting point. So one principle I would say is don't lie. One principle is don't misrepresent. One principle is don't be a hypocrite, because when you do that, there's no reason for people to believe the efficacy of what you're saying. I use Clarence Thomas as an example of this all the time. I'm definitely a proponent of I'm not going to follow rules that nobody else is following. Me and a friend and I were talking about Clarence Thomas, why I disqualified Clarence Thomas from a lot of conversations. He said that, well, can you understand that Clarence Thomas, when he found himself in the position that he was in, where basically Clarence Thomas had gone around before he got nominated for Supreme Court, saying there was no such thing as a glass ceiling when it came to race. That's what he said. So when Clarence Thomas found himself in a little bit of a pickle when he was being held up for nominated to the Supreme Court, he got accused of sexual harassment by Anita Hill, a black woman, by the way. And then his response when he pretty much got to say something was this was nothing but a high-tech lynching. And all I say to people is he was cool in the high-tech part, but I don't get the lynching part. Why are you bringing the lynching part in when you know there's a very specific signal that's regards to race, and you're making this about this is me being a black man that's supposed to be being a pervert? And my point is that from that point forward, everything that, and from going back to forward, everything Clarence Thomas had to say about race was nonsense. Because just by him saying that, he's now acknowledging there is such a thing as a class, when it comes to race, because that was being used to keep him from getting the position that he was in contention for. That's it.
Well, we also have the Democratic Party being the party of minorities, and as soon as there's a minority being nominated to the Supreme Court, because he's conservative, it's time to take him down and try to dig up anything that we can to disqualify him or question his morality.
But at the same time, it was Biden.
Do you hold them accountable too, Gervais?
Yeah, but was Biden for the Democratic Party who took down Anita Hill? So what are we talking about here? Clarence Thomas. It was clear Clarence Thomas was being put up, and I'm sorry, I don't care what anybody says. If you think otherwise, you're just being naive. He was put up as a token candidate because Thurgood Marshall had basically left the court. Sorry, he got set up by both sides because that was the Republicans putting him up as a token candidate, and then it was Biden sitting up there while they did it. He was taking down Anita Hill a peg or two at the same time they were taking Clarence Thomas down a peg or two. So they both were getting railroaded. They both were getting railroaded by both parties. So the thing is that he made a nonsense statement before he got nominated that when it was his turn, because that's all it was, when it was his turn, you just realized, yeah, sorry, Clarence, you either knew he was either the most naive Supreme Court candidate in the world, or it was just like he just didn't think it was going to happen to him. I don't know. Well, but either way, it's not a good look.
What you're saying there, we have a party that claims that they are the party that if you're a minority, you have to support us because we push minority viewpoints. We are all about minorities in the United States. But whenever there is a conservative minority to go up for something like the governorship of California, which I understand you don't like Larry Elder, but there are people attacking him and they're not supporting him, even though they're supposed to be supporting minority candidates. Well, he's a Republican minority. That means he's not even black. I.e., exactly what Biden said to the entire country. If you do not vote for me, that means you are not a real black person. Yet,
dude, it's like you're singing to the choir here. This was being spread around. This is what y'all understand. I'm not going to speak for the whole black community, but I am going to say this, and I think what I'm saying is fairly accurate. Is that the only reason black people vote to the extent that they do the Democratic Party is because we have all bought into this binary system that you can't vote third party. And as a matter of fact, I would say some people just freaking stay home. But the simple fact of the matter is they vote Democrat.
I'm a disenfranchised voter.
Because that's it. Disenfranchised voter is that for by and large, and I've told many of my conservative friends and many of my Republican friends, if you just lay off the racist rhetoric, you would have had these guys a long time ago. And that's why when Trump came in, because he's not solely identified to the Republican Party to that extent that he was seen as an outsider, even to that party, much less, and just as well as the whole system, you started seeing those numbers starting to crack a bit. They were starting to crack a bit because there are black nationalism. If you look at it a certain way, is a conservative project. It's like, I don't need you for X, Y, and Z. I don't want you. I don't want your government involved in my business. It is a conservative project to a certain degree. But the Democratic Party being raging hypocrites, people have been figuring that out for the last 30 years. Black people voting for the Democratic Party is not an expression of their belief that the Democratic Party is looking out for them. Sorry. I'm not going to say that. I held my nose when I voted for Hillary, and when it came to Biden, and before Biden made that crack, because I knew what Biden's history was and how he affected me personally and my community as a whole, that's why I voted for Howie Hawkins. I'm not voting for that clown. I wasn't voting for him. I wasn't voting for Bloomberg. And I don't care how many black liberals or neoliberals or whatever it is were banging tables talking about because Trump was so terrible they were going to vote for Michael Bloomberg. When if you lived in the city and state of New York, are you serious? You're going to vote for Michael Bloomberg? That's how twisted this joint gets. And that's my point, is that you start saying and doing things to such a degree that you forget what you were fighting for and about in the first place. There is no way, and I'm gonna say it. No way any self-respecting liberal Democratic black person would sit up there and try to kowtow and beat other people and voting for Mike Bloomberg. Are you serious?
It's crazy, Gervain. I think we need a 10-party system. I'm disenfranchised.
Yeah, you do.
I don't like Democrats. I'm more conservative leaning, but I, for the most part, don't like Republicans because they're essentially in bed with Democrats. And I think we've got that pretty much well exposed with Trump in certain situations. Every once in a while I go, well, I must be a libertarian. And then every time a libertarian has an opportunity to do anything, they become the most limp dick, non-action politician or public servant you've ever seen in your life. Who's like, they are the most bark and no bite people I've ever seen in my life. Of like, I just want somebody that can represent just a fraction of what I actually believe, because the actual like crossover between Democrats and Republicans on the things that they want to do as far as governments is shockingly, there's literally not that much difference. It's disgusting.
No, but exactly. No, that's why people are giving up. And I think that's why people are now really just publicly saying, and especially more in the political circles, I'm not talking about like mainstream, but that's why the cracks in the electoral politics are starting to widen and in the sense of the efficacy of it. Because just like you have that story about a libertarian, I got my own story about so-called progressive candidates, the AOCs of the world and everyone else. I said, first of all, y'all can't even get the impeachment guy, but we had this whole little thing called force to vote, which I'm not going to go into. But it's like you get them in there, you play the strategy, you understand the strategy, you support the strategy you played in there, and the minute they get in there, all of a sudden they don't know what to do with themselves. AOC, if you don't know Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she said something that I've been saying to people out years. I said, you have to be a politician that when you get in there, you run like you only got one term to do whatever it is you need to do. And then as we can see as her career is played out, she's like, no, well, we got to play the long game, and we're going to need to be 3 or 4 or 5 terms in there. That's the stuff that my dad used to tell me back when I was 10. You got to leave. When you get a guy in, you got to leave him in there long enough so that he can build up his power base and build up his relationships.
Everything's
and basically change the thing. Exactly. Change what
based on the years in. Yeah, you got to build up your
and this same man. Yeah, and this same man, God bless him, voted for Trump in 2020. Okay, see, in 2016. See, that's all I'm saying. See, that's all I'm saying. All I'm saying is this man spent most of our life voting Democrat a certain way and thinking that was a strategy that was going to work. And then when he realized it didn't work, he just voted where at least he felt his heart at. All I told him was either don't vote or vote third party, but he felt he needed to vote for Trump. And it's like, and I get it. It's not so much that I have a problem with him voting for Trump, but it's just like, don't vote into this dumb behind system anymore. Just pick a third party. At this point, almost stay home. But you're right. We need a 10-party system. So to go back to to bring it around town to the original question, which is, are millennials the worst? Of course they're not the worst. They're not the worst. It's just their turn.
Boomers are the worst. Turn.
Was that? Yeah, boomers. Now boomers, I'll give you that. Boomers, I think all of this issues forth from them living too long. And look, I have beloved elders, beloved parents, beloved people who are boomers. So I'm not painting all boomers with a broad brush.
My dad's a boomer. He's an awesome dude.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that by and large, those who run the boomers, or the ruling class of the boomers, they just suck, and they have been so short-sighted, with what's been given to them and what was handed to them. And I think those who are Gen Xers, like with my daughters, you're teaching them how to look out for their own interests, but also to look out for the interests of others. I think with the millennials, I can definitely buy into the fact that in some sense they're being manipulated and used. And I think you'll start to hear those stories come out over the next couple of years when because at some point, every generation discovers the feet of clay of the generation that comes before. And then if you draw the right lessons from that, then something comes new. But none of us are perfect. We're never gonna get this right. But I think what the real problem is that once we start to lose a sense of our responsibility to each other, just as human beings, I think that's how we get to the point where we are now. It's like, there's got to be some things that govern all of us, regardless of how we feel about each other and who did this and who did that. There's some things you got to hold true to, So That's just me.
It's weird. Feels like back in the day, even when I was a kid, you're supposed to believe in your community, believe in your neighborhood, believe in your neighbors. You're all going to have each other's back, and it feels like that's been replaced with believe in the government. And you'll never get me on board with that.
Well, I don't know if it's believe in the government, but I think it's definitely more I believe in myself. I think it's more like the one phrase I heard one time I kind of like it is it's like I'll add an extra one to it. It's like I side with God before my family. I side with my family before my cousin. I side with my cousin before my community, and I side with my community before my country, and I side with my country before the world. So I think on some level that's what's going on. And it's just not, and there's something to that because you do have different levels of obligation and responsibility to people in your life whom you're cared for and who you've taken vows to that you don't have to complete strangers and sometimes your neighbors. But I think it's been taken to a degree where it's just, I think wisdom is the thing that's missing this day because wisdom makes you play chess instead of checkers. And even in checkers is a strategy, but we're talking about, I don't even know what these guys are playing at this point. I think they just bouncing the ball up against the wall to see what sticks.
Playing screw your neighbor.
Yeah, something. But it's like, wisdom. I think wisdom and also just a sense of repentance, forgiveness, and compassion are just largely absent from a lot of the conversations that we're having and a lot of things that we're doing. They're just absent. Because, it's like, put yourself in another person's shoes, man. It's like, because the only way you get to this point is that you honestly think in your head, you've never done anything wrong. You've never done anything that you should be held accountable to or that you should be punished for. Because if you're willing to drop that punishment down on somebody else, then you better be willing to take it too. Because, the way this statute, that you brought up statute limitations before, it's like the way these guys are moving with statute limitations, and I admit, in the furtherance, in the spinoff of cancel culture, it's about to get real sticky real soon. So we have Andrew Cuomo running his mouth, and like I said, in a year and a half later, it's like, more like Biden. So Biden had to bite his tongue for a long time before he came out against Andrew Cuomo, because it's like, then when you just kind of get half accused of the same thing a year before that.
What did Cuomo say? I'm Italian.
Well, Cuomo was, he's like, I'm Italian. What do you want? It's like,
what did Biden say? That was 4 days ago.
Basically.
No accountability. All right, Gevian, I want to say thank you very much. We went off a few different topics here, but I think it was an interesting conversation, and we'll be back here next week.
That's right. Stay strong, Millennial.